Hello there, and welcome to All About Earth, the quiet little corner where science slows its pace and curiosity stretches out to rest. Wherever you are right now, whether curled up in a warm bed, sunken into a comfortable sofa, or lying somewhere under an open sky, I'm glad you're here. Take a moment, breathe deeply, and let your thoughts drift. Tonight we're traveling far back, hundreds of millions of years, into a world that barely resembles our own. A time before flowers, before birds, even before trees. The air was thick and heavy, the land bare and new. And across that primitive landscape, the first explorers from the sea had just begun to crawl onto land. Among them were the arachnids, spiders and scorpions, the original rulers of dry earth. Picture it. No forests, no soil, just stone and wind and shallow tides licking the edges of continents without names. Life was learning how to breathe outside the ocean. The air shimmered with heat, the ground cracked beneath strange limbs, and the silence was broken only by the faint scrape of chitin on rock. These were the pioneers of predation, the eight-legged monarchs of a raw, unclaimed world. Their eyes glistened like tiny beads of obsidian. Some hunted by ambush, others stalked their prey in slow, patient strides. Imagine a scorpion the size of a small dog crossing the sand, or an early spider testing its first fragile strand of silk under the red light of a young sun. This was a planet still inventing the idea of land life, and the arachnids were its first experiment in dominance. It's strange to think that long before mammals, long before dinosaurs even, creatures with silk and venom had already perfected survival. They conquered without noise or fire, without cities or tools, only with patience, stealth, and precision. And in a way that quiet power has never left them. So tonight, as you settle in and let your breathing slow, imagine that ancient world unfolding beneath your mind's eye, a place of stillness and danger, where the first steps on land were taken by beings with 8 legs and endless patience. If you enjoy these slow journeys through time where science drifts softly into story, remember to share, to like, or to subscribe. It helps this gentle corner of curiosity reach other wandering minds. Now, let's keep drifting back, deeper into the age when spiders and scorpions ruled the continents, when the earth was young, silent and waiting for footsteps. About 450 million years ago, the earth was both familiar and utterly alien. The continents, still forming and drifting, were bare and silent, vast expanses of stone and sand, without a single blade of grass, without soil, without shade. If you were to stand there, you'd find no rustle of leaves, no bird calls, no hum of insects, only wind, sunlight, and the patient whisper of the sea. The land was a raw canvas, untouched by roots or rain-softened ground. Every rock was exposed, every grain of sand born from ancient volcanic ash and crushed mountains. It was a world waiting to be claimed. The time was the late Silurian, moving toward the Devonian, roughly 400 million years before your first ancestors would ever breathe air. The planet was still experimenting with its own design. Tectonic plates moved differently then, and the continents that would one day become familiar, Laurentia, Gondwana, Baltica, were strangers to one another. Between them stretched shallow seas, warm and clear, glowing turquoise under a fierce, unfiltered sun. These seas were alive in ways that the land could not yet imagine. Beneath the waves, trilobites crawled across the seabed, like armored beetles, their compound eyes scanning for food and danger. They were ancient veterans of evolution, survivors from long before this age, and they moved with the slow confidence of creatures that had mastered their environment. Nearby, small jawless fish, the earliest vertebrates, drifted in schools, their bodies armored in plates of bone. They had no teeth, no fins as we know them, only primitive mouths that sifted the water for food. Around them, reefs blossomed with coral and strange sponges, building towering structures that teemed with life. Crinoids waved feathery arms in the current. Worms tunneled in the sediment. Sea scorpions prowled the shallows. The ocean was full of movement, color, and noise, a paradise of creatures that had found a rhythm in salt water. But beyond the tidline, the music stopped. The moment the waves retreated, the world became still. The air shimmered with heat. The horizon stretched empty in every direction, and though the air was rich in oxygen, perhaps more so than it would be in later ages, It was almost useless to those who lived in the sea. The challenge was not just to breathe it, but to survive its weight, its dryness, its gravity. To us, air feels soft and forgiving. To the creatures of that time, it was an invisible desert. Without the buoyancy of water, bodies built for swimming collapsed under their own weight. Gills dried in moments. Moisture vanished from exposed skin. The sun's light, unfiltered by an ozone layer thick enough to protect delicate tissues, scorched everything it touched. This was the paradox of early land. The air was rich, but it killed. It promised freedom, but offered nothing to drink, nothing to eat, nowhere to hide. And yet, something stirred at the edge of that world. It began quietly, almost invisibly, with mats of algae clinging to damp rock, thin green films spread across tidal flats, taking advantage of the brief hours when the tide left them in sunlight before reclaiming them. These early pioneers did not march inland. They crept, holding fast to the boundary where water still kissed the land. They photosynthesized, capturing sunlight and exhaling oxygen, slowly altering the chemistry of air and stone. In their own microscopic way, they were terraforming Earth. Then came the worms, small, soft-bodied creatures that ventured a few inches above the surf. They weren't explorers in the human sense, driven by curiosity or courage. They were following food, drawn by the smell of decaying algae or the promise of less competition. Still, their movements were revolutionary. They squirmed and tunneled into damp sand, leaving tiny marks that would one day fossilize into history. Those tracks, the first footprints of life on land, were fragile, temporary, easily washed away. But they mattered. They were the beginning of everything that would follow. The wind, constant and unbroken by vegetation, scoured the rocks and carried fine dust far inland. Without plants to anchor it, the ground was in perpetual motion. Rain, when it came, ran in sudden torrents that carved gullies through stone and vanished into the sea. The concept of soil did not yet exist. Soil is not just dirt, it's the living skin of the earth, formed by decay, by the mixing of minerals and organic matter. Without plants or microbes to build it, the land was sterile. Every surface baked in sunlight by day and froze under thin, brittle air by night. The landscape was harsh, but beautiful in a stark way. The continents shimmered like islands of rust and ash. Volcanoes still smoldered along their edges, breathing out clouds of gas that tinted the sky in strange hues. Orange at dawn, violet at dusk. The sun appeared larger than it does now, filtered through a thinner atmosphere, and its rays struck the ground with fierce intensity. On the horizon, storms rose quickly, lightning flashing across the dry plains. Rain would fall, hiss against hot rock, and evaporate within minutes, leaving the scent of minerals and ozone behind. And through all this, life kept trying. Each low tide brought new experiments. A little further up the beach, a little longer out of water. Some algae developed waxy coatings to hold in moisture. Some worms evolved simple breathing surfaces, allowing them to absorb oxygen directly from the air. Every adaptation was a small victory, but the cost of failure was high. For each creature that managed to survive a few moments on land, countless others dried up and died. Evolution is patient, though. It plays a long game. Over millions of years, these experiments accumulated. Microbial mats began to stabilize sediment, creating small, dark patches that held moisture longer than bare rock. Those patches became miniature ecosystems, oases in an otherwise lifeless desert. As more algae spread, they slowly began to darken the shorelines, changing the way sunlight reflected off the land and even altering local temperatures. The air itself was shifting too. Oxygen levels rose as photosynthetic organisms multiplied, while carbon dioxide declined. The balance of gases that would someday make the world breathable for animals was being written by these tiny, stubborn pioneers. If you could stand there barefoot on one of those early continents, the ground beneath you would feel alien. The rock would be rough and sharp, its surface unweathered by roots or rain. The air would smell faintly metallic, mixed with sulfur from distant volcanic vents and the salt of evaporating seas. Each step would echo in the silence, and you'd realize how utterly alone you were. There were no birds to call, no insects to buzz, no trees to whisper, only wind and the low thunder of distant waves. Yet, in that silence, something profound was happening. Chemistry was becoming biology. The boundary between life and non-life, the ancient tide line where energy and matter first began to cooperate, was advancing. Bit by bit, Earth was teaching itself how to live on land. It's easy from our perspective to think of this age as empty or primitive, but every barren plain, every tide pool, every trace of algae on wet stone was part of an enormous planetary experiment. The atmosphere was transforming, the crust was cooling, the oceans were adjusting their chemistry. Coral reefs, which had just begun to spread, were the laboratories of complexity, testing new body plans, new symmetries, new ways of moving and eating and sensing the world, and all the while the continents waited, patient and silent, for something to crawl ashore and stay. In time, the Devonian would bring what the Silurian could only imagine. The first true plants would appear, tiny, moss-like sprouts, clinging to rock. Their roots would begin to fracture stone, mixing mineral dust with decaying tissue, creating the first real soil. Insects and amphibians would follow, and the stillness of land would finally break with movement and sound. But all of that was still far ahead. For now, the world was a study in contrast, oceans overflowing with life, and land stripped bare. It was as if the earth had divided itself in two halves, the vibrant and the waiting. The sea, restless and loud, was the teacher. The land, silent and patient, was the student. Between them stretched the shoreline, the thinnest and most important border in the planet's history. Standing there at the edge of the Silurian Sea, you might have felt the planet breathing. The wind would rise and fall like a tide, carrying the faintest scent of salt and metal. The light would shimmer across the water, refracting through waves that had seen no eyes above their surface. And somewhere in the foam, a small green thread of algae would cling to rock and hold fast, refusing to be washed away. That single act, insignificant, invisible, was the beginning of land life. Every breath you take now carries a whisper of that moment. The oxygen in your lungs traces its lineage back to those first coastal mats that defied the tide. Every tree, every blade of grass, every field of soil owes its existence to the courage of microscopic cells that dared to dry out and evolve. 450 million years ago, the earth was harsh, empty and unyielding, but it was also full of promise, a promise that one day stone would turn to soil, silence would turn to song, and something with eyes and thoughts would look back on that ancient desert and call it home. The land may have been lifeless, but it was listening. The earth was waiting, as it always does, for something to rise from the water and try again. Around 430 million years ago, in the late Silurian world, something extraordinary happened on the edge of a tide pool. The sea, warm and restless, breathed against bare stone as it had for eons. But this time, something breathed back. It was not fish or worm or algae. It was a hunter, clad in armor, jointed and gleaming, with claws that caught the light like polished metal and a tail curled like a question mark. It lifted itself out of the surf and took its first steps upon the land. The scorpion had arrived, long before deserts and forests, before wings ever beat against the air. The ancestors of scorpions ruled the shallows. They were sea scorpions, eurypterids, ancient giants of the ocean that prowled reefs and muddy estuaries. Some grew longer than a man, their armor ridged and jointed, their claws serrated for grasping prey. They were built for the world of water, for swimming, ambushing and crushing. But among their smaller kin, a new experiment was unfolding. Creatures like Paleoscorpius, the first of their kind to test the unknown world above the tide. The earth they faced was unforgiving. The continents were silent, empty of shade or shelter, hot by day and cold by night. But the scorpion's body was already a kind of miracle, a machine evolved for survival, precision and patience. Its exoskeleton, forged from chitin and hardened with minerals, locked in moisture and shielded delicate organs from desiccation. Its limbs, once meant for gripping the seabed, grew stronger, able to bear its weight without the buoyant cradle of the waves. Its gills, transformed and folded into thin, leaf-like structures, the book lungs, allowed it to draw oxygen directly from the air. This adaptation was as revolutionary as wings would be for birds or thought for humans. The book lung was a quiet invention, a biological bridge between water and sky. Hidden within the scorpion's underside, it shimmered faintly, each delicate plate layered like the pages of a book, a story of breath unfolding one line at a time. Through these chambers, the first scorpions learned to live in a realm where no creature had yet ruled. Palaeoscorpius was not large by modern standards, perhaps 10 to 20 centimeters long, but it was fierce. Its claws were wide and muscular, built for gripping. Its tail ended in a narrow curve tipped with a sting that could inject venom into soft-bodied prey. Its armor bore faint grooves where muscles anchored, signs of strength and control. When paleontologists first uncovered its fossil from Silurian rock, they found it perfectly preserved, as if caught between two worlds, its limbs spread on stone that once lay beneath shallow coastal water. To look at it was to see evolution in motion, a creature still half oceanic, half terrestrial, bridging eras. On those early shores, Palaeoscorpius would have found a landscape rich in opportunity, but poor in comfort. Tiny worms and primitive insects clustered near tidal pools, feeding on decaying algae. The scorpion, with its claws poised and stinger ready, became one of the first true predators of land. Each step it took was a conquest, each kill a proof that the new world could be survived. It moved slowly, deliberately, testing the roughness of rock, the pull of gravity, the taste of the air. Behind its eyes, complex and compound, light fractured into hundreds of tiny visions. It could see motion, shadow, the faint shimmer of something alive in the sand. There were no trees to hide beneath, no soil to burrow in, no birds to threaten from above. The sky was vast and brilliant, the sun heavy and unfiltered. The scorpion's shadow stretched long across the stow. Every movement left an impression, a delicate print that wind and tide might erase in hours. But for that brief moment, it was the mark of the first ruler of land. To breathe in that air must have been like inhaling a new element. Oxygen levels were high, the atmosphere dense and strange. For a creature evolved in water, air was weightless and heavy all at once, dry, invisible, and dangerous. The scorpion's body had to seal itself against loss. Every joint, every seam of its armor was a small act of engineering. It was a walking fortress, a creature of patience and precision. At night, when the heat faded and the wind cooled the rock, the scorpions would have emerged in greater numbers. Their bodies glowed faintly under starlight. Polished by salt and sand, they hunted quietly, claws poised, waiting for the twitch of a worm's body, or the faint vibration of a crawling insect. The strike came fast, claws closing like a trap, tail arching, stinger flashing in the dark. In a world of silence, that movement was the heartbeat of a new ecosystem. For the first time in history, the land had a predator. Fossil evidence tells us that Palaeoscorpius and its kin still carried remnants of their aquatic life. Some fossils show traces of gill-like structures alongside the developing book lungs, suggesting they could survive both in water and on land. Amphibious pioneers, stepping between elements as easily as between centuries. This duality gave them an advantage. They could hunt in tide pools when the land grew too dry, and crawl back onto rock when the water receded. They were not fully terrestrial yet, but they were becoming so slowly, step by step, breath by breath. Imagine them at dawn, clinging to the lip of a tidal shelf, dew condensing on their shells. The sea shimmered below, thick with life, trilobites scuttling in the shallows, jawless fish flickering in schools. But above, the world was empty, a blank stage under a rising sun. One by one, the scorpions climbed higher, away from the pull of the tide, into a world that had never known predators. The earth for the first time felt the touch of claws. Their success was not inevitable. For every scorpion that managed to adapt, countless others must have failed. Many would have dried out, suffocating as their primitive lungs collapsed. Others might have been trapped by the returning tide, crushed or buried by sediment. Evolution advances through risk, and the scorpions took one of the greatest risks of all. They abandoned the safety of the sea for the uncharted promise of the land. The fossils they left behind are small miracles of storytelling. Pressed into stone, you can still trace the arcs of their claws, the curve of their tails, the texture of their exoskeleton. Each ridge, each line, records a moment of adaptation. In the flattened imprint of a Palaeoscorpius you can see the silhouette of determination, a creature that refused to stay in its assigned world. In many ways, these first scorpions were the architects of terrestrial life. By mastering air breathing, they paved the way for others to follow. Every later insect, spider, and terrestrial arthropod owes part of its existence to that single evolutionary gamble. The book lung became a blueprint for countless other forms. The hardened exoskeleton became a symbol of endurance. Even their venom, an elegant weapon of protein and chemistry, would echo through time, reinvented and refined in species yet to come. The scorpion's body tells a story of balance. Its claws, heavy and muscular, were tools of strength, but its legs were instruments of grace, allowing it to move across uneven terrain without noise. Its tail, poised like a drawn bow, could strike with precision or rest in quiet readiness. To modern eyes, it seems almost mechanical, an ancient automaton built by the planet itself. But beneath that armor was something fragile and alive, a pulse that had dared to cross the boundary between ocean and land. If you could crouch beside one of those first scorpions, watch it in the half-light, you'd see not just an animal, but a metaphor. Its eyes would glint with reflected sunlight, each facet a tiny mirror of the sea it came from. Its breathing would rasp softly, the whisper of air through a new kind of organ. And as it moved, deliberate and silent, you might feel the enormity of what you were witnessing, the beginning of conquest, not of empires or kingdoms, but of an entire element. The scorpions did not march in armies. They came one by one, tide after tide, each testing the edge of the possible. Some died within minutes, others survived for hours, then days. Generation by generation, they learned the rhythm of the land, the way the rock cooled at night, the way dew gathered in the cracks, the way prey left faint trails on the sand. They learned to wait, to ambush, to strike, and in doing so they became the first lords of Earth's surface. It is said that evolution does not plan, it only experiments. Yet, standing in that ancient silence, it would have been easy to believe that the planet itself was watching, holding its breath as the scorpion raised its tail and claimed the shore. The Earth had finally found its hunters. In the deep time of the Silurian, before leaves, before birdsong, before the comfort of shade, the scorpion's armor shone under an unfiltered sun. It was a symbol of transformation, a creature half of sea, half of stone, teaching the air what it meant to contain life. When it struck, it did not just hunt, it rewrote the rules of existence. Millions of years would pass before forests would rise, before amphibians would crawl from swamps, before mammals would take their first breath. But long before all of them, the scorpion had already done it. It had stepped onto land and stayed. In the fossil of Paleoscorpius, flattened yet immortal, you can almost hear the echo of that moment. The scrape of claw against rock, the first hiss of breath drawn from the sky. It is the sound of courage written in biology, the sound of evolution learning to walk. And though the tides have washed that world away, and continents have shifted and folded upon themselves, the lineage endures. Every scorpion alive today carries in its lungs, its armor, its sting, the memory of that first ascent, the day the sea gave birth to the land's first king. The Carboniferous world was a cathedral of green and air. From horizon to horizon, stretched forests unlike anything alive today, dense jungles of towering tree ferns, horsetails as tall as houses, and club mosses rising 30 meters into the mist. Their fronds arched over swamps that steamed beneath a heavy, oxygen-rich sky. The air itself shimmered with life, thick with moisture and the scent of resin and decay. It was a planet reborn, transformed by plants that breathed not quietly but with the force of continents. Through the long, humid days, these forests exhaled oxygen until the atmosphere reached levels the Earth would never see again, nearly 35% compared to 21 today. Fire burned brighter, insects grew to monstrous size, and in the shadows of this primeval jungle, the arachnids became giants. The Carboniferous lasted from roughly 359 to 29 million years ago, a span of 60 million years during which the land took on a strange, feverish vitality. The seas receded in places, leaving behind marshes and inland deltas. Warm, wet climates wrapped the equatorial regions, feeding endless vegetation that fell, decayed, and compressed into the coal seams we still burn today. The forests were dense but quiet. There were no birds to sing, no mammals to stir the undergrowth, no flowering plants to scent the air. Instead, the world pulsed with the rustle of leaves and the hum of insects. Ancient, primitive insects, with wings like panes of glass and bodies as long as a man's forearm, and watching them from the ferns, unmoving, patient, were the great hunters of this age. Spiders and scorpions grown to impossible size. The physics of air had changed. With so much oxygen, the atmosphere had grown thicker, more nourishing to creatures that breathed through small tubes or book lungs. In this world of abundance, metabolism was no longer constrained. Every breath carried more energy. Every heartbeat could power something larger. For arthropods, creatures without internal skeletons, this was liberation. The very chemistry of the sky whispered to them, grow. In the heart of these steaming forests lived Megarachne cervinae, the great shadow of the Carboniferous, nearly 2 meters across when measured from leg tip to leg tip. It was not a spider in the strictest sense, as later research would reveal, but an ancient relative, an arachnid so large and alien that early scientists mistook it for a true spider of monstrous scale. To imagine it is to imagine fear, in slow motion, a dark, low-slung body gliding through the undergrowth, the chatan of its limbs gleaming wet under filtered light. Its 8 eyes glimmered like droplets of oil, its fangs curved and precise. It moved without a sound, part of the earth itself, and when it struck, the forest went still. Its prey were creatures worthy of its size. Giant dragonflies, Meganeura, drifted through the swamp air on wings 70 centimeters wide, their transparent membranes flickering like shards of amber. Their compound eyes reflected every ripple of light, but even they were not safe. In a world where oxygen made flight easier but danger constant, the air was no refuge. A single misstep, a shadow cast over a fern, a tremor in the still water, and Megarachne would lunge. Its legs drove forward, claws piercing soft thorax, fangs injecting venom that stilled wings in mid-beat. For a heartbeat, the forest would freeze, then return to its humid whispering as though nothing had happened at all. On drier ground, another monarch reigned, Polymonoscorpius kirktonensis, the giant scorpion. Reaching lengths of over 70 centimeters, it prowled the forest floor with deliberate, armor-clad grace. Its pincers were broad and serrated, its tail arched high, the stinger glinting like obsidian. Beneath its plates, its book lungs folded and unfolded like bellows, drawing in the oxygen-rich air that powered its colossal body. It was a creature built for ambush, capable of crushing small amphibians or primitive insects with a single squeeze. Fossils show its exoskeleton etched with fine details of muscle attachment, a design of power and precision that no engineer could improve upon. The amphibians were newcomers then, fragile, damp-skinned wanderers who had only recently learned to live beyond the water's edge. Some were small and lithe, others thick-bodied with sprawling limbs and eyes that blinked above the mud. They breathed through lungs and skin, making them prisoners of the humidity. To the great scorpions they were the perfect prey, slow, soft, and easy to find in the heat of the forest night. One can imagine Pulmonoscorpius waiting motionless among roots, sensing faint vibrations through the ground, the air still, except for the pulse of its own primitive heart. When the amphibian came close, it would strike first with its claws, then the tail, driving venom into its victim. The forest floor absorbed the struggle in silence. In this world, size itself was an ecological experiment. With oxygen so plentiful, evolution tested the limits of form. Millipedes grew as long as cars, Arthropleura the living railway of the forest, undulating across fallen logs, eating decaying plant matter and scattering the ferns in its path. Winged insects expanded their range, dragonflies became aerial predators of terrifying grace, and beetles, early armored forms, burrowed through the litter in multitudes. The air buzzed with wings, the ground shimmered with exoskeletons, and the trees themselves were alive with motion. It was the first time in Earth's history that land had a complex food web, plants capturing sunlight, insects feeding on plants, predators feeding on insects, and scavengers feeding on all. The scorpions and their spider-like kin stood at the top of this chain. They were the first great terrestrial hunters, shaping the rhythm of life on land, just as sharks shaped it in the sea. Their reign was not quiet. They were the embodiment of adaptation, the planet's first proof that land could sustain not just life but dominance. The very chemistry of the air was their ally. The high oxygen made movement easier, reflexes quicker, and regeneration faster. Wounds healed swiftly, eggs developed rapidly. Everything about the Carboniferous favored the many-legged and the patient. The forests themselves were strange marvels. Their trunks were hollow and scaly. Their roots formed networks called stigmeria that spread wide, but shallow through the swampy soil. When lightning struck, the resulting fires burned hotter and faster than anything the planet had yet seen, for oxygen fed the flames greedily. Yet the forests always returned, growing from spore and spore again, locking away vast amounts of carbon in their woody tissues. Every fallen branch became buried in the muck, pressed by centuries of sediment, turning slowly to peat and coal. The earth was creating its own fuel, storing sunlight underground, while feeding the age of giants above. To walk through such a world would be like walking through a dream, both lush and oppressive. The air would taste metallic and thick. Every breath would fill your lungs with weight. Ferns brushed against your shoulders, shedding droplets that glowed faintly in the filtered light. Dragonflies the size of hawks darted between trunks, their wings humming with the electricity of air itself. From somewhere in the gloom, a movement, a ripple of darkness on the forest floor, and you'd glimpse the slow, deliberate advance of Pulmonoscorpius, claws raised, tail poised, eyes fixed. The creature would vanish into the undergrowth, leaving only a trembling of ferns behind. At the edge of the swamp, where water met land, other arachnids lurked, descendants of the earlier, smaller forms. They wove simple burrows, waited in ambush, their fangs glistening with droplets of venom that mirrored the dew. Some may have learned to spin crude silk, not yet the fine web of later spiders, but strands strong enough to bind a struggling insect. Every adaptation was a rehearsal for what would come later, each generation pushing a little further into the realm of complexity. The Carboniferous was not just a time of growth, it was a symphony of transformation. The atmosphere, the vegetation, the animals, all fed each other in an accelerating loop. The more the forests expanded, the more oxygen filled the air. The more oxygen filled the air, the larger the creatures became. It was an age of abundance bordering on excess. Yet even here, balance lurked beneath the surface. With oxygen so high, the planet flirted with instability. Fires raged, carbon levels fell, climate began to shift. But for tens of millions of years, life reveled in its golden height, and the arachnids were its glittering aristocracy. In the fossil record, the remains of Megarachni and Pulmonoscorpius tell their story in exquisite detail. Delicate impressions of joints and plates, preserved in shale, record every contour of their armored bodies. The chitin has long turned to stone, but the shape remains. The curvature of claws, the articulation of limbs, the faint outlines of sensory hairs. Under a microscope, you can still see the traces of the world they inhabited. The spores of ferns, pressed into the same layer, fragments of insect wings, droplets of ancient resin. It is as though the forest itself fossilized in breath. When scientists first reconstructed Megarachni, they imagined it as a monstrous spider haunting the Carboniferous swamps, an image that captured the public imagination. Later, it was revealed to be closer to the sea scorpions than to modern spiders. But that truth did not diminish its majesty. Whether predator or scavenger, aquatic or amphibious, it was a symbol of what the earth was capable of when air itself became an amplifier of life. Pulmonoscorpius, meanwhile, remains unmistakably terrestrial, a creature that had claimed the forest floor, that breathed air without the ocean's help, that struck its prey beneath the roots of trees still dripping with primordial rain. Toward the end of the period, the balance began to change. Supercontinent Pangaea was assembling, and climates grew drier. The vast swamps started to shrink, the forests receded, and the oxygen levels that had fueled the giants began to fall. Slowly, the massive arthropods dwindled. Their descendants would survive, smaller and more cautious, adapted to a world with thinner air. The age of titanic spiders and colossal scorpions faded into the rock record, a brief extravagant chapter in the long story of life. Yet the memory of that age lingers. Every spider spinning its web, every scorpion lifting its tail under the desert stars, carries the echo of those colossal ancestors that once ruled a world of green flame and heavy air. The Carboniferous was their triumph, a time when the earth whispered grow, and they obeyed. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The crackle of fern fronds brushing together in the oxygen-rich heat, the flutter of immense wings, the distant rasp of chitin against bark. Somewhere beneath that soundscape, in the cool shadow of a tree fern, a giant spider crouches. Its breath is slow and rhythmic, its body still except for the faint quiver of anticipation. Above it, a dragonfly glides through a shaft of light. Unaware, for a moment, the world holds its breath, then motion. A strike, a silence, and the forest exhales again, rich and endless, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, though everything on land had just changed forever. The Devonian world was changing. The air was thick with warmth, the land alive with the slow pulse of new ecosystems, finding balance. Plants had spread far inland now, ferns, horsetails, and early trees forming small forests where once there had been only rock. Insects filled the air with their first uncertain flights. It was a world buzzing, crawling, and fluttering, a world ready for a new kind of hunter. And from the shadows of roots and leaves, something small, patient, and utterly transformative emerged, a creature with 8 legs, quiet intentions, and a gift that would reshape life on land, the first spider to spin silk. It began simply. These early spiders were not architects of intricate webs yet. They were cautious creatures, hiding under bark or in burrows, laying their eggs in delicate sacs of silk to keep them safe from drying winds and hungry mandibles. Their silk was a soft armor, a material spun from within their bodies, stronger than any fiber yet produced by nature. It shimmered faintly in the light, a thread both invisible and indestructible, born of chemistry and evolution. The spider's ancestors had already discovered the value of silk for protection. But here in the Devonian forests, something changed. The silk was no longer just a wrapping for life. It became a weapon, a tool, and eventually an art. To make silk is a marvel of biology. Inside the spider's abdomen lie its spinning glands, specialized organs that transform liquid protein into solid thread with a twist of physics. The spider's body is a living factory, drawing from its own resources to weave material lighter than air, yet tougher than steel. Each thread emerges smooth and perfect, a molecular lattice of strength and flexibility. No human invention, not even our finest synthetic fibers, has yet matched it, and this gift was discovered by creatures no larger than a thumbnail, creeping quietly across Devonian stone. The first silk spinners were builders of safety rather than snares. They laid down drag lines to anchor themselves while exploring or hunting. They spun silken retreats inside cracks, wrapping their eggs in soft cocoons that could withstand desiccation and the erratic rains of the Devonian climate. But nature is never content with simplicity. In a world full of insects, the first flying prey, rich in energy and unpredictably mobile, the spider's silk began to find new purpose. What began as a shield became a trap. Imagine the moment it happened. A small, patient hunter waits beneath a leaf, its silk glands humming with instinct. An insect, perhaps an early winged creature, clumsy and unaware, blunders too close. The spider, experimenting by chance or evolution, spins a loose strand, sticky enough to hold what touches it. The insect brushes against the filament, and for the first time in Earth's history, a web begins its story. It wasn't the perfect geometric web we imagine today. Those would come much later. These first webs were more like chaos given purpose. A few strands across a burrow entrance or a rough mesh stretched between roots. But they were. A tiny vibration through silk told the spider everything it needed to know, that something was struggling, that dinner had arrived, and so began one of the most successful hunting strategies the planet has ever seen. Silk changed the flow of energy on land. Before, predation was a matter of movement, chasing, lunging, catching, but the spider invented stillness. It learned that by building, by waiting, it could turn the air itself into a trap. Insects flew through sunlight, unaware that invisible architecture hung all around them. With every meal caught, the web transformed sunlight, captured first by plants, eaten by herbivores, and now trapped in silk into sustenance for the spider. Through silk, energy began to move upward through the food chain in new ways. That energy, stored in tiny, struggling wings, would ripple through time. Spiders fed on insects, amphibians fed on spiders, reptiles fed on amphibians. Eventually, millions of years later, birds would swoop down to eat insects caught in webs, or feed on spiders themselves. Even mammals would join the banquet. All of it, the flutter, the flight, the fall, traced back to those first shining threads, strung across the Devonian twilight. Silk had linked the air to the soil, the hunter to the hunted, the microscopic to the monumental. The Devonian was not an easy age. The land was still new, the climate volatile. Storms swept the forests, tearing up trees and flooding lowlands. Yet the spiders endured. Their silk gave them resilience. It was their shelter during rain, their anchor against the wind, their shield for eggs, and their weapon for food. Evolution rewarded this versatility. Over time, the spiders diversified. Some became ground dwellers, spinning trapdoors of silk to ambush prey. Others stretched their threads higher, stringing them between branches where the wind carried the scent of flying insects. With every experiment, silk adapted. Some threads grew sticky, others remained taut and dry for structure. It was as if nature itself had found its loop. Picture one of those early silk spinners, perched on the side of a fern trunk at dusk. Its body glows faintly in the filtered light, the air damp and alive with the sound of insects. It moves slowly, methodically, drawing silk from its spinnerets and laying down strands that gleam silver white. The thread arcs between stems, catching droplets of dew that turn it into a constellation. Each drop glitters for a heartbeat before rolling down, leaving the thread perfectly dry and ready to catch what passes through. The spider retreats to the edge of its creation and waits. A moment later, a small insect, a primitive mayfly perhaps, flutters by. Its wings strike a strand. Instantly the web shivers, energy racing along silk faster than sound through air. The spider feels it in every limb, the pulse of motion, the signature of life. In a blur it moves, not in haste but in certainty. The prey struggles, the silk holds, and as the spider delivers its bite, paralyzing and final, a chain reaction begins that will echo through millions of years of evolution. Silk is more than material, it is information. Through it, a spider reads the world. Each vibration carries meaning. The weight of prey, the wind's strength, the footsteps of something larger. The spider's mind, small but exquisitely tuned, turns these signals into a symphony of awareness. It knows when to move, when to strike, when to repair. It is both weaver and interpreter, living at the intersection of touch and patience. In that sense, the spider became the first true artist of Earth's land, a creature whose survival depended not just on instinct, but on design. Scientists still marvel at silk. Even after hundreds of millions of years, it remains one of the most advanced biomaterials ever created. It's made of proteins aligned in patterns so complex that they blend strength and flexibility in impossible balance. One strand can stretch up to 5 times its length without breaking. The tensile strength of dragline silk rivals that of high-grade steel, yet it weighs almost nothing. It is biodegradable, renewable, and spun at room temperature. An engineering triumph achieved not by machines, but by instinct. And it all began in those humid Devonian forests, with creatures no larger than your fingernail. The spider's invention changed the architecture of ecosystems. Once webs appeared, the air itself became part of the food web, a literal network, both physical and ecological. Every insect that took flight risked becoming part of a spider's dinner. This, in turn, shaped insect behavior, driving evolution toward better eyes, faster reflexes, new flight patterns. The race between web and wing began, and it has never really ended. Even now, every gossamer thread you see on a morning walk is part of that same ancient conversation between hunter and prey. It's funny to think that something so delicate could hold such power. A single thread of silk can stretch across a gap in a forest canopy, glinting in the sun like a whisper. Birds may fly through it, dragonflies may dodge it, but for the creatures of its own scale, it's a wall of fate. And yet, without it, the world as we know it would be poorer. Spiders are not just hunters, they are gatekeepers of balance. They control insect populations, recycle nutrients, and form a bridge between plants and predators. So when you trace the web backward, you find the story of land itself, of energy, adaptation, and design. In the deep hush of the Devonian twilight, when the last light filtered through the ferns and early trees, the spider's web must have glowed faintly, like starlight tangled in the leaves. A breeze would move through it, carrying the scent of wet soil and distant sea. Somewhere nearby, another spider would be weaving, and another after that, until the forest was laced with unseen geometry. The land, once bare and silent, had become a living network. Through all the ages that followed, the Carboniferous, with its giant forests, the rise of reptiles, the coming of birds and mammals, the silk remained. It adapted, diversified, and refined itself, but its essence never changed. It was still a miracle spun from within, still the thread that stitched predator to prey, life to death, and all of it back to the earth itself. And so, the story of the first web is not just a tale of a clever arachnid. It's the story of how energy learned to flow more efficiently, how patience became a weapon, and how art and survival became one. It's a story written in protein and light, told in the language of vibration and silence. Even now, when you see a spider in the corner of a room or a dew-covered web stretched between blades of grass at dawn, you're looking at a design older than trees, older than bones. You're seeing the same quiet genius that turned air into architecture and waiting into power. The spider may be small, but it carries within it the legacy of that first spinner that dared to connect the land with silk. And perhaps if you listen closely enough, the earth still whispers to it, as it did all those ages ago. Weave. Night in the Carboniferous world did not fall gently. It descended like a living thing. The heavy air, swollen with moisture and oxygen, cooled just enough for mist to gather among the ferns and towering trees. The daylight chorus of wings and rustling leaves faded, replaced by the hush of stillness that non-deep forests know. The ground, soft with decaying plants and the scent of peat, exhaled warmth into the darkness. Beneath it, hidden from sight, something stirred. Its claws shifted in the soil, its tail flexed, and a faint rasp of chitin against stone marked the beginning of the hunt. The king of the Carboniferous night had awakened the scorpion. To live in this world was to live in shadow and scent. The Carboniferous forests were immense, thick as cathedrals, and perpetually humid. Great tree ferns arched over shallow swamps. Horsetails rose like spears, and every inch of ground was layered with fallen fronds. Insects the size of birds darted through the dark, their wings whispering like paper. Amphibians slithered and croaked among the roots, their wet bodies glistening in the moonlight that filtered through the canopy. The air itself was alive with the smell of rot and growth, sweet, metallic, and constant. It was a paradise of prey, and the scorpions ruled it silent. The Carboniferous scorpions were larger and stronger than almost any that would follow. Some species, such as Pulmonoscorpius kirkinensis, reached nearly 70 centimeters in length, armored giants compared to their modern descendants. They carried within them the memory of their ancient lineage, creatures that had once walked the ocean floor now entirely at home on land. Their armor was thick and matte, a living shield that caught the light of the moon in dull reflection. Beneath that armor, complex systems worked in perfect rhythm, the book lungs drawing air through delicate folds, the hemolymphs circulating oxygen through their bodies. Each movement was deliberate, efficient, and soundless. Scorpions were among the first true masters of the terrestrial night. Their hunting was an act of patience. Unlike the swift predators of later ages, they did not chase. They waited, crouched beside a root or beneath a fallen log. They felt the world through their legs. Tiny sensory hairs, Trichobothria, detected the faintest tremors in the air, the distant flutter of a beetle's wings, the cautious shuffle of an amphibian's footstep. They could sense prey without seeing it, interpret vibrations through soil like a musician reading a score. In that darkness, where eyes failed, The scorpion heard the world through the earth itself. When it struck, it did so with an elegance that bordered on artistry. Its pincers were not crude tools, but instruments of precision, able to seize and hold without hesitation. The claws, broad and serrated, snapped shut with enough force to crush the carapace of an insect or the soft bones of a small amphibian. The tail, flexible and poised like a question mark above the body, delivered the final punctuation, a swift downward strike that injected venom into the struggling prey. The venom, a cocktail of proteins and enzymes, immobilized and began to dissolve tissue, turning muscle into nourishment even before the scorpion began to feed. It was a grim alchemy, but also a necessary one. In these young ecosystems, the scorpion was not merely a predator, it was a regulator, a keeper of balance. The carboniferous forests were bursting with life, and without predators, insects and amphibians would have multiplied beyond control. The scorpions, by feeding on them, maintained a fragile equilibrium. Their presence ensured that energy flowed steadily through the food web, that no one link overwhelmed the others. They were the unseen governors of the night, enforcing order through silence and Their lives, however, were not spent entirely above ground. The scorpion was also an architect. Its claws, designed for both combat and labor, made it one of the first creatures to sculpt the earth for shelter. During the heat of the day, when the forest steamed and predators prowled, scorpions retreated underground. They dug tunnels with careful precision, carving chambers where humidity and temperature remained constant. Some burrows were simple, just a shallow scrape beneath a rock. Others descended deeper, branching into small networks that could house eggs and young. Within these earthen fortresses, the scorpions found protection from the volatile world above. The act of digging itself shaped the land. As they turned the soil, scorpions became inadvertent engineers of the carboniferous ecosystem. They loosened compacted sediment, allowing air and water to penetrate deeper layers. Their burrows trapped organic debris, decaying leaves, fragments of prey that slowly broke down into nutrient-rich material. Even their waste contributed to the fertility of the ground. In their quiet, predatory way, the scorpions helped to create the first fertile soils, the kind that would later feed forests and sustain generations of life. Without them, the land might have remained sterile far longer. At night, when they emerged again, the forest transformed. The darkness was alive with phosphorescent fungi glowing faintly on decaying logs, and the air vibrated with the rhythmic calls of amphibians. The scorpions moved through this living dreamscape like spirits, slow, deliberate, and ancient. Their armor made no sound. Their tails curved high, swayed gently with each step, balanced like a metronome to their movement. If you had walked there, you might have seen only the reflection of moonlight off a glossy carapace before it vanished into shadow. Their hunting grounds were as varied as their habits. Some roamed the forest floor, feeling the pulse of footsteps above. Others waited in ambush at the entrances of their burrows, their claws half buried in moss, tails twitching with anticipation. Still others climbed the lower trunks of ferns, where insects congregated in the damp air. In each place they left traces of their reign, faint trails in the mud, molted shells gleaming like discarded armor, small hollows where they had waited and fed. The forest floor was a gallery of their presence, etched in silence. The scorpion's role extended beyond predation. In death, they fed the same cycles they had once controlled. When a scorpion died, its body decomposed quickly in the humid air. Bacteria and fungi broke down its chitinous shell, releasing nutrients back into the soil. Even in decay, it enriched the land it had once ruled. The carboniferous ecosystem, though primitive, was already a loop of reciprocity, predator feeding prey, soil feeding plant, plant feeding insect, and insect feeding predator again. And at the center of that rhythm, the scorpion's quiet existence gave shape and structure to the night. If you could have stood in that world and watched one hunt, it would have looked almost ceremonial. A small amphibian, perhaps newly evolved and still awkward on its limbs, would venture too close to the edge of a burrow. The scorpion would wait until vibration and scent aligned, then rise. Its claws would extend slowly, feeling the air. A single step forward, another pause. Then, in one smooth motion, the strike. The prey's cry would be brief, Absorbed by the thick air, the scorpion would feed quickly, efficiently, then drag the remains to its burrow to finish its meal in safety. By dawn there would be no sign of the struggle, only disturbed soil and a faint wet mark where the forest had fed itself. Despite their fearsome reputation, scorpions were not reckless killers. They were survivors. Every drop of venom, every burst of movement, came at a cost. Energy was precious, and in a world where the balance of heat and moisture shifted daily, conservation was key. The scorpion was a creature of restraint. It waited hours, even days, for the right moment to strike. It could slow its metabolism to endure hunger, and its body could go without food for months, if necessary. Its patience was not laziness, it was mastery of time itself. Under ultraviolet light, their bodies would have glowed faintly just as modern scorpions do today. The exact purpose of this fluorescence remains a mystery. But in the Carboniferous darkness it would have given them an unearthly presence, a soft, ghostly light shimmering through the ferns as they moved. Perhaps it served no purpose at all, a mere quirk of their chemistry. Or perhaps it was a signal, a silent language between hunters that shared the same realm. Their young were born alive, carried upon the mother's back, until they could fend for themselves. In the still air of the Carboniferous night, such a sight would have been tender and strange. A creature of darkness and venom, moving carefully, burdened with life. She would guide her brood to the safety of a burrow, feed them small insects, and teach them the art of waiting. Generations were raised this way, ensuring that when one scorpion vanished into the soil, another would rise to claim its place. Over millions of years, as the Carboniferous forests spread and evolved, the scorpions continued to refine their way of life. They were not builders of empires, nor did they need to be. Their kingdom was the forest floor, their rule enforced not through fear, but through necessity. By preying upon those that multiplied too quickly and enriching the ground beneath their feet, they became indispensable to the balance of the land. They were, in every sense, the custodians of Earth's first great terrestrial ecosystems. When dawn finally came to those ancient jungles, light filtered through the canopy like water through glass. The scorpions withdrew to their burrows, their bodies disappearing beneath the moss and soil. The forest would wake again, the insects buzzing, the amphibians calling, the plants reaching toward the sun. Yet beneath it all, the scorpions remained, quiet and eternal. Their presence was a hum beneath the heartbeat of the forest, a reminder that even in the earliest days of life on land, the night belonged to them. And perhaps, if the earth could speak, it might have whispered to them as they slipped back underground, "Guard the balance, keep the darkness orderly, rule the night, but feed the soil." For that is what they did. They ruled, they hunted, and they returned what they took. In their sting and their stillness, they carried the first lessons of the living earth, that every predator feeds the prey of tomorrow, and that even the kings of the night must, in the end, serve the soil. In the great history of Earth's land, where towering ferns once shaded giant dragonflies and scuttling predators ruled the night, there was another kingdom, quiet, hidden, almost invisible. It did not roar or sting or shimmer in the light. It whispered, it worked, and it built the ground beneath everything else. This was the realm of the mites and the ticks, the smallest of the ancient arachnids, whose empires were measured not in distance or dominance, but in the depth of the soil they made. They were tiny architects of life, born from the same lineage that had once given rise to the hunters and the web weavers. But while their cousins spun traps or brandished stingers, the mites turned their attention downward to the dark, damp spaces where fallen leaves gathered, where dead things softened, where the world began again. It was in that quiet chaos beneath the ferns of the Devonian and Carboniferous forests that they found their calling to decompose, to recycle, to renew. Imagine kneeling at the edge of a Carboniferous swamp. The air is heavy, sweet with decay. Beneath the thick carpet of rotting fronds, a whole universe is alive. Between grains of soil, across the edges of decomposing wood, countless mites move, so small that you would miss them if not for the shimmer of their bodies in a shaft of light. Each one is a speck, a dot in motion, yet together they are the pulse of the forest floor. They are the recyclers of the ancient earth. When a tree fern dropped its leaves, When an insect died, when a creature's waste sank into the soft earth, the mites and their kin arrived. They fed on fragments of what had once been alive, plant fibers, fungal threads, sloth skin, pollen grains, spores. Their tiny mouths, designed for scraping and grinding, broke the world down piece by piece. It was a slow and patient work. Nothing glamorous, nothing loud, but without it, the cycle of life on land would have stalled before it had even begun. Before the mites, the land was mostly rock and residue. Organic matter could fall and linger for years without breaking down, because no one was there to digest it. But as these minute arachnids spread through the forests, they began to change everything. By feeding on detritus, they unlocked the carbon and nitrogen trapped within, returning them to the soil. Their droppings, microscopic but countless, mixed with mineral particles to form the first true humus, that dark, rich layer of earth capable of holding moisture and nurturing roots. In this way, they became the first soil makers, crafting the foundation of terrestrial ecosystems, grain by grain. Every handful of soil, even today, holds a history written by mites. In the Carboniferous, their abundance must have been astonishing. They lived in leaf litter, inside bark, in the hollows of decaying logs, and in the moist soil beneath. Some grazed on fungi, keeping the balance between growth and rot. Others fed on microscopic nematodes, controlling their numbers and maintaining equilibrium among the unseen multitudes. A few were parasites, tiny opportunists that clung to the skin of amphibians or insects, living off their host's fluids. But the majority were decomposers, Earth's original caretakers. To see one under magnification would be to glimpse a miniature masterpiece of engineering. Their bodies were compact, armored with tough exoskeletons that resisted the abrasive grit of soil. They moved with surprising speed on delicate legs, brushing aside particles hundreds of times their own size. Their sensory hairs detected vibrations, scent, and chemical cues in the dark. To them, a world of decay was not death, but opportunity, a landscape rich with texture, taste, and purpose. When scientists later found fossilized mites trapped in amber from later ages, they were astonished. The creatures inside looked almost identical to those alive today. Their bodies, their legs, their tiny eyes, all the same. Evolution had refined them early and found them nearly perfect for their role. Nature rarely fixes a design so quickly, and when it does, it is a sign of quiet success. The mites had achieved something monumental by doing something small over and over again, until the world itself was reshaped by their persistence. The Earth's soils, dark and fertile, owe their origins to creatures like these. The ferns and trees of the Carboniferous could not have grown without the nutrients the mites returned to the ground. The thick beds of peat that became coal, the very energy source of modern civilization, were formed from forests sustained by their invisible labor. Every fallen leaf they consumed became part of a greater equation. Sunlight captured by plants, transformed into matter, then released again by decay. In their tiny bodies, the mites carried the mechanism of balance. It is humbling to think that the smallest of creatures hold the largest responsibility. While great predators ruled the land above, it was the mites that kept the system from collapsing under its own abundance. Without them, dead matter would have choked the surface, suffocating the forests that produced it. Nutrients would have remained locked away, and the march of evolution would have slowed to a crawl. But because of them, every ending became a beginning again. Their world was a dark paradise. Beneath the towering plants, light barely touched the ground. The air was thick with spores and the smell of wet bark. Everywhere there was motion, fungal threads creeping through wood, insects laying eggs in damp leaves, worms tunneling through mud. The mites moved among them, unseen, their bodies glinting when the moonlight reached a crack in the forest floor. They were not the hunters or the hunted, they were the workers, the keepers, the quiet engines of renewal. Some mites specialized in feeding on decaying wood, breaking down lignin and cellulose, the stubborn molecules that once made trees stand tall. Others grazed on the fungi that grew on decomposing matter, creating a delicate equilibrium between growth and breakdown. In doing so, they controlled the pace of decay itself. Too fast and the soil would flood with nutrients, destabilizing the ecosystem. Too slow and the dead would overwhelm the living. The mites kept the tempo steady, their invisible labor giving rhythm to the forest's pulse. In the rich soils they helped build, the first roots dug deeper, anchoring plants that would evolve into trees. As those trees fell, the mites began again. They were tireless, unbothered by the slow pace of their own significance. To them, the universe was a handful of soil, a world within a world vast in its own right. And in that miniature expanse they reigned supreme. Perhaps the most beautiful thing about them is that they never stopped. Across hundreds of millions of years, through changing continents and climates, they have continued their work without pause or complaint. Today, they thrive in every corner of the world, from tundra to desert, from rainforest to your backyard garden. Each patch of ground beneath your feet hums with their presence. Every leaf that falls is destined to meet them. They are the eternal recyclers, the quiet continuity of life. And yet, for all their invisibility, their importance cannot be overstated. The soil is Earth's memory. It records everything that lives and dies, everything that grows and falls away, and the mites are its archivists, transforming what is lost into what will come again. Each fragment they chew, each pellet they leave behind, is an entry in that endless record. They are the authors of renewal, the scribes of decay. If the earth could speak, perhaps it would address them with gratitude. Keep working, little ones. Turn death to life. Make the ground ready. And they would obey, wordlessly, as they have since the first forests darkened the horizon. In the vast theatre of prehistory, it is easy to be dazzled by giants. The massive insects, the monstrous plants, the roaring amphibians. But the true story of life's endurance was written by things too small to notice. The mites, in their countless billions, built the platform on which all those giants stood. Every step of a reptile, every sprouting seed, every pulse of evolution was supported by their labor beneath the surface. Close your eyes and imagine that ancient forest again. The air hums with the sound of unseen wings. The ground is soft underfoot, fragrant with decay. Somewhere below, hidden in the darkness between grains of soil, 1,000 tiny creatures move. You can't hear them, but you can feel their work in the richness of the earth, in the resilience of life itself. That is their legacy, the quiet strength that makes growth possible. They are small, yes, smaller than the head of a pin, smaller than a drop of rain, but they are mighty in their purpose. They do not need recognition, or sunlight, or applause. Their art is patience, their canvas the ground itself. They are the pulse beneath the roots, the invisible hands that turn death into soil and soil into life. And so the mites and ticks continue, as they always have, faithful, tireless, unseen. The great forests rise and fall above them. Civilizations come and go, the climate shifts, continents drift. Yet beneath it all, the recyclers remain. They work in silence, reshaping the world grain by grain, as if obeying a single eternal instruction whispered long ago by the earth itself. Make the land fertile. Keep life going. Do not stop. The end did not come in a single storm or cataclysm. It came slowly, like the long breath of a planet changing its mind. For millions of years, the Carboniferous world had been a paradise of green abundance, a vast, humid cathedral of ferns and colossal trees, where air itself was thick with oxygen and life. The forests had stretched across continents, their roots woven through swamps, their fallen trunks pressed into the peat that would one day become coal. Giant insects ruled the air, enormous spiders haunted the undergrowth, and scorpions stalked the night. It was an age of excess and wonder, but paradise on earth never lasts forever. The decline began with subtle shifts, the kind even the ancient trees could not feel at first. The atmosphere that had once been rich with oxygen began to change. Volcanoes stirred. The seas rose and fell. The great continents, driven by the slow grinding of tectonic plates, drifted together toward union, forming the supercontinent Pangaea. As land masses collided, mountain ranges rose, and global weather patterns changed. The once warm, wet climate that had fed the endless swamps began to cool and dry. The monsoon rains faltered. The air, once heavy with moisture, grew thinner. The breath of the world turned cold. It happened over ages, but the forests felt it first. The towering lycopsid trees, those giants with trunks like pillars of green stone, could not adapt. Their roots, shallow and specialized for wet soils, could not find water when the swamps began to shrink. The ground cracked. The peat dried. Where once there had been lush expanses of life, there came stretches of barren mud. The forests fell quietly one by one, and with them fell the oxygen they had created. The balance of air began to slip. Oxygen, once abundant at nearly 35%, dropped sharply. To the great arthropods, whose enormous bodies depended on that richness, it was as though the sky itself had grown thinner, meaner. The breath that had once fueled their titanic size now starved them. The atmosphere, no longer their ally, had become a wall pressing down. Insects and arachnids that had once grown to monstrous scale began to shrink. The mighty megarachni, once the shadow beneath the ferns, grew smaller with each generation. The colossal scorpions, masters of the night, retreated into crevices, their reign confined to burrows and darkness. The forest floor that had once trembled with their movement now fell silent. They did not vanish overnight, but the world that had built them was collapsing around them. The land no longer belonged to creatures that breathed through open tubes and folded lungs. It was reshaping itself for something else, something with lungs within, with warm blood and hardened bones. As the forests died, the amphibians suffered too. The sprawling wetlands that had nurtured their eggs and fed their larvae began to disappear, replaced by drier plains and seasonal drought. In this harsher world, the first reptiles rose. They carried within them an innovation that would define the next era. The amniotic egg, sealed against desiccation. They could live away from water, travel farther, hunt longer. They were smaller than the giants that had come before, but they were better suited to what the earth was becoming. The arachnids watched this transformation from the edges of survival. They could not compete with the cold endurance of reptiles, nor with the intelligence of emerging amphibian predators. The thick air they had once thrived in was thinning, and their giant bodies could no longer draw enough oxygen to move with ease. Slowly, generation after generation, they diminished not in number but in form. The kings and queens of the Carboniferous shrank into their modern proportions, learning to live again as small hunters, retreating into safety and shadow. The cooling of the planet continued. Glaciers advanced across the southern supercontinent of Gondwana, locking away vast stores of water and further drying the equatorial lands. The swamps that had once stretched endlessly across lowlands vanished beneath frost and dust. The rhythm of the earth had changed from pulse to pause. The air grew cooler, crisper, and less forgiving. The age of lush humidity was over. The earth was learning to breathe in a new way. To the great arachnids, this was the beginning of retreat. The once rich undergrowth became a hostile place, cold, sparse, and unpredictable. Many species sought refuge underground, burrowing into the soft, decaying peat that remained. There, in the warmth of the soil, they found what the surface no longer offered: stability, moisture, and darkness. The scorpions carved deeper tunnels, chambers, lined with damp earth, where they could wait out the dry seasons. The spiders wove silk across burrow mouths, sealing themselves from the wind. What had once been their empire became their refuge. Yet even in decline, they were resilient. Evolution had given them patience, the ability to endure through stillness. They did not rage against the change. They adapted quietly. A smaller body needed less air. A hidden life required less light. Their armor remained, their instincts intact. The great predators of the past became the quiet architects of survival. In the fading Carboniferous light, the landscape must have felt haunted. The air no longer shimmered with wings the size of hands. The great dragonflies, unable to sustain their massive flight in thinner air, vanished or diminished. The swamps, once thick with the hum of insects and the movement of giant arthropods, grew silent, except for the croak of amphibians and the soft shuffle of reptiles in the leaves. The forests, once green and endless, became patchworks of withered trunks and ash-coloured ferns. The earth itself seemed to sigh, tired from the weight of its own fertility. The decline of the giants was not a tragedy, not in the way we imagine endings. It was a transformation, part of the endless rhythm of adaptation. Life had reached a threshold, a point where what once worked too well had to make way for what could endure better. The oxygen-rich air that had nurtured the age of exoskeletons had also made it unstable. When that air changed, so too did the hierarchy of life. There is a strange beauty in the way the Earth resets itself. Each age writes its own grandeur, then quietly erases it to make space for the next. The Carboniferous had been a world of abundance beyond measure, but abundance always carries the seed of its undoing. Too much oxygen made fires fierce, storms volatile, and balance fragile. When the forests fell and the air calmed, the planet exhaled relief. The fever broke. In this cooler, leaner atmosphere, vertebrates began to dominate. Their lungs, their mobility, and their ability to regulate body temperature gave them an advantage that no arthropod could match. The ground that once trembled beneath the legs of giants now belonged to scaled and silent wanderers. The first reptiles emerged as symbols of a new order, small, warm-blooded dreams of the age to come. For the Arachnids, the night became a sanctuary. As the world above changed, they retreated into its shadows. By day they hid beneath rocks or inside hollow logs, emerging only when darkness returned. Their hunting continued, but on a smaller scale, insects remained abundant, even as oxygen declined, and the Arachnids found sustenance in their numbers. They were no longer monarchs, but survivors, keepers of an ancient craft in a world that no longer remembered their reign. The great scorpions that had once prowled open forests became smaller, more secretive. Their armored bodies dulled in color, blending into soil and bark. Their stingers still gleamed, their claws still clenched, but their kingdom had shrunk to the span of a burrow. The giant spiders that had once ruled the fern jungles turned delicate, their webs finer, their bodies compact. The air that had once carried them as titans now held them as whispers. They lived in miniature, but the pattern of their lives remained unchanged. Patience, precision, persistence. If you could stand there, on the edge of the Carboniferous twilight, you would feel the melancholy of a world in transition. The mist would still rise at dawn, but thinner now, and the scent of decay would have given way to the sharper smell of dry earth. You might see the faint glint of a scorpion's tail in the half-light, or the delicate shimmer of silk on a fern stem. The giants were gone, but their shadows lingered, written in the new, humbler forms that survived them. The collapse of the forests marked more than an ecological shift. It was a philosophical one. The earth was reminding life of a truth it often forgets, that greatness is fleeting, but continuity endures. The age of giants had burned brightly, but briefly. Now came an age of subtlety, of creatures that could thrive in constraint, of systems more efficient and less extravagant. The oxygen continued to fall, reaching levels closer to those we know today. The fires that had once consumed entire forests became rarer. The air grew cleaner, cooler. Ice sheets advanced, and the rhythmic pulse of glaciation began to shape the continents. Life withdrew, hibernating through the long cold, waiting for balance to return. When the Carboniferous finally gave way to the Permian, the great experiment of the eight-legged giants was over. Their age had ended not with extinction but with transformation. The enormous had become the small, the visible had become the hidden. They had not vanished, they had adapted. They continued their work beneath the earth, in the quiet places where light rarely reached. And perhaps, in that long silence between ages, the earth whispered to them one last time, "The air has changed. The world must move on. Rest now, hide and wait." They obeyed as they always had. They folded themselves into the soil beneath stones, into crevices cooled by shadow. They survived as echoes of what they had once been, quieter, smaller, but still there. The night remained theirs, even if the glory of their size was gone. The great forests turned to coal, the air grew thin and cold. The giants of the Carboniferous passed into memory, and new life took the stage. Yet beneath the roots of the world, the legacy of the Arachnids endured, sleeping in the earth's breath, waiting for warmth, for darkness, for another age to come. And if the wind could carry a memory, it might sound like this. A whisper rising from the ruins of a forest that once breathed for the world. The age of giants is over, but the earth still remembers their footsteps. Deep beneath the weight of time, under layers of stone and pressure, the memory of the eight-legged ones endures. The earth is a patient storyteller. It does not speak in words, but in impressions, in shadows of shells, in threads of silk turned to amber, in the faintest grooves left by claws that once grasped the air. These fossils are its whispers, fragments of a language, written in mineral and silence. They tell of a world long gone, of a dynasty that ruled before mammals dreamed, before birds took flight, before even the soil beneath our feet had learned to breathe. They tell the story of the Arachnids. When the ancient forests of the Carboniferous fell and turned to stone, the creatures that had stalked their roots were buried within, pressed between layers of silt and clay. The scorpions, spiders, and their kin became their own monuments, preserved not as life, but as memory. In the shale of ancient swamps and the amber of ancient forests, the marks of their reign remain. Each fossil is a heartbeat captured in rock, each one a frozen moment in a story that still unfolds across the surface of the living earth. Imagine uncovering one, a thin slab of grey stone, smooth on one side, and on the other, the perfect outline of a scorpion's body. You can see the curve of the tail, the ridges of its armor, even the faint trace of claws extended in eternal readiness. There is no color now, no motion, no sound, yet everything about it speaks of power. This creature once hunted under a sky filled with dragonflies the size of birds. It once ruled a world dense with heat and breath. Now it rests in silence, its bones turned to rock, its story compressed into a shape that fits in your hand. The weight of that stone is the weight of hundreds of millions of years, and in it you can feel the gravity of evolution itself. Not all fossils are so obvious. Some are delicate beyond belief, spider silk trapped in amber, a single thread spanning time. To see one is to witness the persistence of art. Within that golden resin, hardened over eons, the web glows like frozen sunlight. Every strand, each curve and junction remains intact, as if the spider had only just left to hide beneath a leaf. Sometimes the spider itself is caught beside its creation, its legs curled inward, its body preserved in exquisite detail. These fossils are not merely remnants, they are echoes of behavior, proof of patience and precision that transcend extinction. Amber, in its quiet alchemy, became the spider's time capsule. Resin flowed down the trunks of ancient trees, sticky and bright, trapping leaves, pollen, air bubbles, and the small creatures that lived among them. Over millions of years, that resin hardened into stone, sealing its prisoners in translucent eternity. Within it, scientists find the earliest evidence of webs, eggs, and even prey mid-cap. There are moments in amber where time itself seems to pause, a fly frozen in a final struggle, wings half-folded, its predator's fangs suspended inches away. These are the oldest stories of the hunt ever told. Through these fossils we glimpse the continuity of the arachnid legacy. The great scorpions that once dominated the Carboniferous forests left behind their impressions in rock, but their descendants still move across the deserts and jungles of today, smaller but unchanged in spirit. The spiders, too, have endured. From the crude silken retreats of their Devonian ancestors to the intricate orb webs of later ages, their craft has never been lost. The amber fossils reveal that even tens of millions of years ago, spiders were already masters of geometry, spinning symmetrical webs designed to capture both motion and light. Each fossil tells not only of life, but of environment. The layers of sediment surrounding a scorpion's imprint speak of shallow water and still swamps. The presence of certain minerals hints at volcanic ash or flooding rivers. The position of a spider within amber, the type of pollen trapped beside it, tells of the forest that once existed, of the air that once carried the hum of insects. To hold such a fossil is to hold a fragment of atmosphere, the chemical memory of an ancient season. It is a bridge between eras, the Earth's own diary written in code. Paleontologists, with their brushes and chisels, read that diary one grain of sand at a time. In their hands, the fossils of arachnids become translators between past and present. A single stinger or claw can reveal how these creatures hunted, breathed, and grew. Microscopic scans of fossilized exoskeletons show where muscles once attached, how joints moved, how veins of hemolymph pulsed through their armored bodies. Even the wear on the tips of claws tells stories, burrowing, of climbing, of lives spent in constant adaptation. And the silk, always the silk, is perhaps the most haunting relic of all. Scientists have discovered fossilized strands so fine that they can only be seen under the microscope, yet they remain astonishingly intact. The structure of the silk proteins, fossilized in minute mineral films, shows that its strength and elasticity have barely changed since the Devonian. Nature had perfected it early. The same material that once cradled eggs under ferns now glistens in your garden at dawn. The spider's invention has outlasted empires, continents, and even atmospheres. To think of this continuity is to feel the humility of time. The great arachnids of the ancient world may have vanished as the planet cooled and dried, but their descendants never left. They inherited not the size of their ancestors, but their mastery, the ability to endure, to adapt, to weave life from the air itself. And though they are smaller now, their influence is vast. The role they once played in shaping ecosystems has never diminished. Even today, the descendants of those fossilized hunters remain nature's quiet regulators. They still stalk the night, keeping the balance between life and excess. They feed on insects that would otherwise overrun the world, controlling populations invisibly, efficiently, without fanfare. The energy they gather flows onward into the bellies of birds, reptiles, and small mammals. In every forest, in every garden, the food web still hums with the rhythm first established by their ancient kin. If you were to trace that flow of energy backward from the songbird that eats a spider, to the spider that eats a fly, to the fly that fed on a leaf, you would end up at the same source, the ancient forests of deep time, where the first spiders spun silk across the damp air and the first scorpions struck at the edges of the swamp. The fossil record is not a static gallery. It is a living current, the physical memory of an unbroken line. In museum cases, fossils of arachnids sit under glass, their forms small and unassuming compared to the skeletons of dinosaurs or the teeth of saber-toothed beasts. Visitors pass them by quickly, often not realizing that these are the relics of the planet's first land predators, the first true engineers of balance. A scorpion claw, preserved in stone, represents one of the earliest acts of terrestrial predation. A fragment of spider silk in amber is the beginning of architecture itself. These are not minor fossils. They are chapters from the book of beginnings. Under certain lights, a piece of amber glows as if alive. You can tilt it and see a bubble of ancient air trapped inside, air that once brushed the wings of dragonflies, air that once filled the book, lungs of scorpions. Within that same golden capsule, a spider's web might gleam faintly, connecting you directly to an age that ended hundreds of millions of years before your birth. It is humbling, almost sacred, to realize that the world you breathe now was shaped by creatures whose stories are sealed within that tiny stone, and the earth, for all its transformations, has not forgotten them. Fossils are its memory, its testimony that nothing truly disappears. Every layer of sediment is a page, every imprint a scent. In the deepest rocks, the arachnids sleep perfectly preserved, their forms pressed against time like signatures on an eternal contract between life and stone. They remind us that extinction is not erasure, it is translation. Life changes language, but continues to speak. The fossil record of arachnids spans more than 400 million years. It tells us that from the moment they stepped onto land, they never left it. Through ice ages and extinctions, through heat and flood and drought, they have persisted. The fossils of Pelascorpius in ancient shale whisper of the first breath of air drawn by a creature of the sea. The silk in amber tells of patience and design. Together they form a chorus of endurance. If you listen long enough, the stones seem to murmur, "Remember us," not in grief but in pride. The scorpions and spiders of the past are not ghosts. They are ancestors. The air you breathe carries traces of their work, the soil their chemistry, the balance of ecosystems their legacy. The eight-legged memory of Earth is not confined to fossils. It lives in every corner where life depends on the quiet precision of a web or the stillness of a nocturnal hunt. And when paleontologists lift another stone, revealing another delicate shape pressed into eternity, the Earth itself seems to sigh with recognition. The past, once again, finds its voice. Beneath the microscopes and field lamps, under the dust of discovery, the fossilized claws and threads whisper their ancient refrain. We were here first. We shaped the land. We taught the world to breathe, to balance, to wait. Remember us not as giants, but as keepers of rhythm. We are the memory of patience. In that whisper, the fossils speak for all time, for the forests turned to coal, for the webs lost in amber, for the long shadows of the Carboniferous twilight. They remind us that even the smallest creatures can leave the deepest marks, and that the earth in its boundless patience remembers everything. In the modern world, where skyscrapers mirror the clouds and fields stretch under a quilt of satellites and light, there are still hunters older than mountains, patient, silent, and everywhere. They move through your garden, your attic, your fields and forests. They are in the corners of your room, in the folds of leaves, in the cracks between stones. They have lived through the rise of continents and the extinction of empires. They are the quiet regulators of life on Earth. The spider. To most of us, they seem small, fragile, almost forgettable. Yet their presence is woven into the very balance of the living world. There are more than 50,000 known species of spiders, and scientists believe countless others remain unseen. Tiny, nocturnal, living their secret lives in soil and canopy. Collectively, they perform one of the most important ecological services on the planet, keeping everything else in check. Every day, across forests, deserts, wetlands, and cities, spiders consume hundreds of millions of insects. By some estimates, the total weight of prey they eat each year rivals the weight of all humans combined. They are the quiet custodians of population balance, ensuring that no single species of insect overruns the world. Without them, the fields would drown in locusts, the forests in caterpillars, the crops in swarms of leaf-eaters. The hum of life would become a roar of imbalance. It is easy to overlook the elegance of this system because it happens so quietly. A spider does not chase or roar or tear at its prey with spectacle. It waits, it senses, it responds with grace and precision. The web is its orchestra, each strand a string tuned to vibration, a moth's flutter, a mosquito's buzz, even the landing of a gnat. All are felt through the silk, interpreted instantly, and answered. The spider moves with an artistry, born of millions of years of refinement. Its strike is not violence, but rhythm, and through this rhythm, ecosystems breathe in harmony. Every mosquito caught in a web is one less carrier of disease. Every beetle taken from a leaf is one less bite from a farmer's harvest. Every grasshopper removed from a field saves a stalk of wheat, a grain of rice, a leaf of green. The spider's work ripples outward, invisible yet vast, preserving the subtle balance between abundance and ruin. But the spider's story is not only one of control, it is also one of giving. For every insect it consumes, it becomes nourishment in turn. Birds depend on them, especially in spring when nestlings must be fed with rich protein-laden meals. A single family of warblers may consume thousands of spiders in a season, gleaned from branches or plucked delicately from webs. Lizards, frogs, and small mammals too rely on them as a steady food source, a thread connecting predator and prey through every layer of the biosphere. Even wasps, in their strange cruelty, use spiders as living incubators for their larvae. A grim cycle, but one that speaks to how central spiders are to the flow of energy in the web of life. In this way, the spiders are not merely predators, they are the pulse of nutrient recycling. Each act of predation, each death and consumption, returns energy to the soil and air. When a spider dies, its small body feeds the decomposers, enriching the ground it once walked upon. From decay, plants draw strength. From plants, insects are born again. And the spider, ever patient, waits for them once more. There is something almost philosophical about their presence. Spiders represent the balance between motion and stillness, life and death, chaos and order. In their webs, you can see the geometry of nature's logic. No waste, no excess. Every thread purposeful. A web is not only a trap, it is a conversation between structure and wind, between survival and art. The spider builds with mathematics encoded in instinct, adjusting each spiral to the breeze, each anchor line to the shape of its home. And yet, despite their perfection, spiders are humble creatures. They do not compete for the sunlit spaces of the world. They live in shadows and corners, thriving where others would starve. They are the quiet companions of our existence. They watch from the edges, asking for nothing but a little room to work. Through evolution, they have shaped far more than the fates of insects. Their constant presence as predators has driven the evolution of countless other species. Insects evolved sharper reflexes, keener senses, and faster flight to avoid webs and fangs. Wings became more agile, eyes more precise. Some insects learned to mimic twigs or leaves to evade detection. Others learned to cut or avoid webs altogether. Every leap of speed, every twist of camouflage, was a response to the patient pressure of the spider. Even plants, in their slow wisdom, were touched by the influence of the eight-legged hunters. The plants that attracted fewer herbivorous insects, or that grew in shapes less accessible to spider webs, had better chances of survival. Some evolved chemical defenses, others evolved physical barriers like thick leaves and waxy coatings. In a way, the presence of spiders sharpened the resilience of the world. They were quiet sculptors of evolution, refining everything they touched. In human terms, they are almost invisible to the point of myth. We notice them most when we fear them, and yet they have been beside us since before there were humans to notice. The same spiders that dwell in our basements and gardens are heirs to a lineage that has outlasted ice ages and continental drift. They are reminders that balance endures longer than chaos, that patience is as potent a survival tool as strength. To walk through a forest at dawn is to feel their legacy all around you. The mist catches on threads stretched between branches, each one beaded with dew that glitters like a constellation. These fragile bridges shimmer for only a few hours before the sun burns them away. Yet the spiders will rebuild them by nightfall. Each day they undo and redo their art, renewing the invisible architecture of the world. In the desert, where water is scarce and the air sharp with heat, other spiders dig burrows deep into the sand, sealing the entrances with silk to preserve moisture. Their tunnels breathe faintly with the temperature of the earth, a steady rhythm of cool life beneath the blazing day. In the tropics, webs stretch across rivers, vast as sails, catching insects that skim the water's surface. In tundras, tiny spiders survive in mosses, moving slowly but enduring where few others can. From jungle to city, mountain to coast, they are everywhere life is possible, and sometimes even where it should not be. Each ecosystem depends on them in ways we barely comprehend. Remove them, and the balance collapses. Insects would multiply unchecked, stripping leaves from forests, spreading disease, unraveling the delicate choreography of pollination and decay. The small birds that depend on spiders for food would weaken. The plants that depend on those birds for seed dispersal would fade. Within a few generations, entire landscapes would falter. The spider's absence would echo louder than its presence ever did. And yet, they ask for nothing. No nests of feathers, no migrations, no elaborate rituals. They live simply, efficiently, beautifully. Their silk is their armor, their weapon, their art, and their home. Their hunger is their compass. Their patience is their prayer. Even in the heart of cities, they persist. A single urban garden may host hundreds of species, orb weavers, spinning between lampposts, jumping spiders, patrolling windowsills, cellar spiders, haunting the corners of basements. They adapt to artificial light, to concrete, to glass. The vibrations of engines and footsteps replace the tremors of rain and wind, but their senses adjust. They are not defeated by civilization. They coexist with it, reshaping its edges into something living. And perhaps the most beautiful truth is that they do not need to change the world to sustain it. They simply keep it from falling apart. Every web, every caught mosquito, every meal recycled into soil is an act of quiet repair. If the earth were a body, spiders would be among its immune cells, constantly balancing the spread of life to prevent the fever of overgrowth. Their influence reaches beyond ecology into psychology, art, and symbolism. Across cultures, spiders have been both feared and revered. The weavers of destiny, the guardians of patience, the creators of ancient mythologies imagined them as cosmic spinners, stitching the universe together with invisible threads. Modern science, in its own way, confirms the metaphor. Each web is a literal microcosm, a mathematical structure of tension and resilience, capable of absorbing chaos without breaking. To see a spider in your home, then, is to glimpse something far older than fear. It is to see an emissary of balance. That small creature in the corner is part of a lineage that has been safeguarding the world's equilibrium for more than 400 million years. It will work all night to keep your air a little clearer, your crops a little safer, your world a little steadier. And if you were to lean close, if you could listen not with your ears but with the quiet part of your mind, you might hear what the earth itself has always whispered through them. Do not fear the web. It holds the world together. Do not harm the hunter. It guards the harvest. Do not crush the small. It keeps the vast in balance. The modern spider does not seek to rule as its ancestors once did. Its kingdom is one of harmony, not conquest. It hunts, but never wastes. It kills, but only to live. In the slow dance between life and decay, it moves with perfect measure. When the morning light returns, its webs will vanish into the brilliance of day, but their purpose remains, woven into the fabric of existence itself. The spiders will begin again at dusk, their patience infinite, their rhythm eternal. They will keep the balance as they always have, one thread at a time, one breath at a time, one life at a time. And somewhere, beneath the quiet hum of our cities and the rush of our own human noise, the earth still murmurs in their direction, softly and with gratitude. Keep weaving, keep balancing. You are small, but you keep the world alive. In the stillness of dawn, when the first light catches on a spider's web, the world pauses. The delicate threads shimmer in impossible perfection, each one thinner than a strand of hair, yet strong enough to hold a struggling insect mid-air. Dew beads along its lines, glinting like stars. For most it is simply a thing of beauty, a transient sculpture, spun in silence. But to the scientist, to the dreamer, to the engineer staring through the lens of possibility, it is something more profound, a blueprint for the future. For millions of years, the spider has been a quiet engineer, perfecting a material and a sensory system that no laboratory has yet fully replicated. Its silk, spun from proteins within its body, is lighter than cotton, tougher than steel, and more elastic than rubber. Its hairs, known as trichobothria, can detect the faintest breath of air, the smallest tremor in the ground, or the tiniest change in pressure, making the spider not only an artist of construction, but a master of perception. Together, these two innovations, silk and sensitivity, have become the inspiration for some of humanity's most exciting technologies: biomaterials, robotics, medicine. It begins, as it always has, with the silk. To understand its brilliance is to appreciate the intersection of biology and physics, where molecules align into miracles. Spider silk is not a single substance, but a family of materials. Each spider can produce several kinds: dragline silk for structure, capture silk for stickiness, cribolite silk for texture, and silk for wrapping eggs or prey. Each type has a different purpose, yet all share a single, astonishing trait: strength through design. At the molecular level, silk is made of proteins called spidroins, long chains of amino acids folded into repeating crystalline and amorphous regions. This dual structure gives it both rigidity and flexibility. The crystalline sections act like anchor points, while the amorphous zones stretch and absorb energy. It's a living composite material, created without heat, pressure, or pollution, spun at room temperature using nothing more than water and air. When scientists began to study its composition, they realized they were looking at one of nature's most efficient forms of engineering. A strand of dragline silk, the kind a spider uses to create the framework of its web, can absorb more energy before breaking than any synthetic fiber known. Measured gram for gram, it is stronger than steel and tougher than Kevlar, yet it weighs almost nothing, and it can stretch to nearly 1/3 its length without breaking. It is a material of paradoxes, fragile in appearance, indestructible in function. This combination of properties has driven decades of scientific effort to recreate it. The challenge, however, is immense. Spiders themselves cannot be farmed easily. They are territorial and cannibalistic. To harvest silk in meaningful quantities, researchers turn to biotechnology. By inserting spider silk genes into bacteria, yeast, plants, and even goats, scientists have coaxed other organisms to produce silk proteins. These bioengineered silks have begun to find their way into real-world applications. Artificial ligaments that flex like the real thing, sutures that dissolve within the body, fabrics that are light and breathable, yet nearly untearable. In medicine, spider silk's biocompatibility, its ability to interact with living tissue without triggering immune responses, has made it a marvel of possibility. Researchers have used it to create scaffolds for growing nerve cells, providing pathways for damaged neurons to reconnect. In eye surgery, silk-based membranes have been tested as support for corneal healing. In regenerative medicine, scientists imagine using silk to weave the frameworks of organs themselves, flexible, strong, and biodegradable. The imagination stretches further still. In defense research, lightweight armor woven with synthetic spider silk could one day replace traditional bulletproof materials, offering protection without weight or rigidity. In aerospace design, silk-inspired composites might form the next generation of parachutes, cables, and flexible joints. Even fashion, that ancient mirror of technology, looks to the spider for sustainable fabrics, silk spun in labs, colored with biology instead of chemicals, grown rather than manufactured. The future of clothing, soft and strong and endlessly renewable, may trace its lineage back to the patient weaver in your garden. But silk is only half the story. The other half lies in the way spiders sense the world, the subtle brilliance of their hairs. To the casual observer, a spider's body seems smooth, almost polished. Under magnification, it becomes a forest of fine filaments, each one an exquisite sensor tuned to vibration, airflow, and electric charge. These hairs, the Trichobothria, are not passive. They are active instruments, capable of detecting movements as small as a single molecule of air passing by. Every breeze, every tremor of the ground, every flutter of wings becomes information. Through these vibrations, the spider perceives its world as a living map. It can tell not only that something has moved, but how far away it is, how fast, in which direction, and even what kind of creature caused it. The spider lives in a universe of signals, a symphony of motion interpreted through hair and silk. Engineers have begun to borrow this sensory genius. By studying the mechanics and structure of spider hairs, they have developed bio-inspired sensors that can detect vibrations, pressure, and sound with unprecedented sensitivity. These sensors are being integrated into robotic systems, giving machines the ability to feel their surroundings in ways that cameras or microphones cannot. A spider-inspired robot can navigate through darkness by reading the air, detecting the faintest motion from a human hand or the flutter of a leaf. In medicine, this sensitivity is finding new purpose. Artificial tactile sensors modeled after spider hairs are being designed for surgical robots, allowing doctors to feel texture and resistance remotely. Imagine a surgeon operating through a robotic interface that can detect the softness of tissue, the pulse of blood beneath skin, or the tension in a suture, each movement guided by feedback modeled after an ancient predator's sense of touch. In environmental monitoring, spider-inspired sensors could detect vibrations from approaching earthquakes, subtle shifts in air pressure, or the footsteps of endangered animals moving through dense forest. The technology bridges biology and machine, giving modern science the same delicate awareness that once defined a web in the wind. Every breakthrough in this field feels like a rediscovery rather than an invention, a moment of recognition that nature had already solved these problems long before we learned to name them. Spiders have been perfecting their designs for 400 million years. Humans, with all our intellect and computation, are still catching up. There's something poetic in that humility. We look to the cosmos for inspiration, yet some of the greatest marvels of engineering are strung between two twigs or hidden in the dust under our windowsills. The spider is an ancient engineer of nanotechnology. It creates composite materials and vibration sensors without laboratories, without waste, without error. Its factories are its own cells, its tools are instinct and time. In the shimmer of a web or the tremor of a hair, we see the blueprint for a sustainable future, one that learns from the quiet efficiency of nature rather than competing against it. As scientists design new materials and sensors, They are rediscovering that elegance lies not in complexity but in balance. A thread that bends but does not break. A sensor that listens more than it shouts. Some laboratories have already begun merging the two halves of spider inspiration, silk and sensitivity, into a single vision. Hybrid materials woven from synthetic silk and spider hair-inspired sensors could one day form the skin of robots capable of touch, or the framework of smart clothing that responds to temperature and motion. Silk fibers laced with nanowires could generate energy from movement, turning a fabric into a living circuit. The boundary between biology and technology, once rigid, now begins to blur. And through it all, the spider remains both muse and model. It spins its silk in the same way it has for eons, unbothered by our fascination. It waits in stillness, teaching us through example that innovation is not always invention. It is often observation, patience and repetition. The future, it seems, belongs as much to the weavers as to the dreamers. Perhaps someday we will wear armor as light as a strand of silk, or walk through buildings whose foundations are modeled on the geometry of webs. Perhaps surgical robots will move with the grace of a spider's leg, guided by vibrations so subtle they seem like intuition. When that day comes, we will not have surpassed nature, we will have joined its rhythm. And perhaps, if the earth could speak to us as it once whispered to the first creatures who learned to spin, it might say, "You have finally learned to listen. You have studied my oldest engineer. Now weave wisely, build softly, sense deeply. Remember who taught you to make strength from air and intelligence from stillness." The spider, the ancient engineer, will go on weaving long after we have finished building. Its silk will still glisten in the morning light. Its hairs will still read the music of the wind, and we will still look to it for wonder. For in its patient threads and trembling hairs we glimpse not just technology but the poetry of invention itself. Across the long memory of the earth, few creatures have embodied humility so perfectly as the spider. It has never been a conqueror, never sought dominion, never needed power to endure. It does not roar or run or glitter in the sun. It waits. It listens. It weaves. And in that patience, in the rhythm of thread and breath, it has persisted for over 400 million years, surviving the rise and fall of continents, the passing of entire worlds, long before mammals walked, before the first birds sang, before any human dream of civilization began. The spider was already at work, binding the air to the earth with silk and balance. Its story is not one of triumph, but of quiet endurance. Evolution has favored it not with size or speed, but with restraint, with the ability to thrive without excess, to build beauty from minimal means, to live through change by bending rather than breaking. In this, the spider is both an ancient survivor and a philosopher, a teacher of simplicity and resilience in a universe that often forgets both. If we could listen deeply enough, perhaps we would hear its lesson, whispered through the tremble of its web. Strength does not require noise, balance is not achieved through domination, and permanence belongs not to the loud, but to the patient. For 400 million years, the spider has been the silent architect of stability. Its webs catch not just prey, but imbalance itself. Every mosquito it traps, every moth it stills, every beetle it consumes is an act of quiet regulation, a correction within the great machinery of life. Without spiders, the world would tilt toward chaos. Insects would multiply unchecked, stripping the leaves from trees, draining crops, spreading disease. The soil, deprived of its delicate nutrient cycles, would weaken. The forests would thin, the air would change. The spider, small and unseen, is the hinge on which the door of equilibrium swings. And yet, we seldom notice. In the modern age, as cities rise and machines hum, humanity has drifted from that ancient rhythm. The web that once held everything together now trembles under the strain of indifference. Forests fall, drenched in chemical rain. Fields glow with pesticides meant to silence the buzz of insects. But they silence more than that. They poison the invisible keepers who feed on them. The webs dry out. The hunters retreat. And when the spiders vanish, the silence is not peace. It is imbalance. In places where forests have been stripped bare, where the soil lies exposed and the air smells faintly of chemical dust, insect populations often surge. Without their natural predators, They multiply beyond measure. They devour the tender green that tries to return. Crops wither beneath their feeding. Pests, once controlled by the simplest act of predation, now demand endless human intervention. More sprays, more toxins, more desperate measures that only deepen the wound. It is a cruel irony. We destroy the quietest guardian in pursuit of control, only to find that control unraveling. The web we thought we ruled collapses, strand by strand. The spider's patience has long been its secret strength. It can survive on little, it can wait for days without movement. It can rebuild its web each dawn even after the night's wind has torn it apart. But even patience has limits. The vast human reach now stretches into every forest, every meadow, every crack between stones. Light pollution confuses the rhythms of night hunters. Habitat loss leaves nowhere for webs to hang. Agricultural chemicals poison both prey and predator alike. In our haste to dominate, we erase the invisible network that makes life livable. The consequence of losing spiders is not only ecological, it is philosophical. It reminds us how easily we forget the value of small things, how blind we become to the quiet labor that sustains us. The spider, in all its modesty, mirrors the truth of balance, that greatness often depends upon what is overlooked. To study the spider is to encounter humility made manifest. It lives within the limits of what it needs, never taking more than its hunger demands. Its web is built and rebuilt, never hoarded, never wasted. When its silk grows old, it eats it, recycling the proteins to begin anew. Its entire existence is an act of sustainability, of circular purpose. It wastes nothing, consumes responsibly, and gives more to the ecosystem than it. What a contrast that is to the human story. Rebuild, but rarely rebuild with care. We consume, but rarely return what we borrow. We see the web, marvel at its beauty, and then sweep it away. And yet, the spider endures. Even in the corners of our cities, it continues its ancient craft, spinning its threads among steel and glass. It adapts where it can, making do with what remains. It asks for no sanctuary, only a chance to work. Its quiet persistence should shame us, or at least humble us. The spider's philosophy is not one of conquest, but of relationship. It does not seek to dominate its world, only to understand it through vibration and flow. Every tremor on its web tells it a story of wind, of movement, of life. It responds not with fear, but with calibration, with subtle adjustments that keep it in balance. It listens before it acts. It senses before it strikes. Imagine if humanity did the same. Imagine if before cutting a forest, we felt the tremor that decision would send through the rest of the web. The insects, the soil, the rain. Imagine if we listened to the world not with our machines, but with our patience. There is deep wisdom in such stillness. The spider teaches that survival is not about overpowering change, but embracing it. When the wind tears its web, it does not rage or despair. It simply begins again, thread by thread, with no complaint, no pride, no expectation. It builds because that is what it does. It lives because that is what life requires. To watch a spider at work is to see persistence embodied in elegance. The spiral of silk expands outward, each strand placed with geometric grace. It measures distances with its legs, not eyes, trusting the rhythm of touch. It feels for tension, for harmony, for balance. Every web it makes is unique, yet every one carries the same architecture, patience. There is no haste in its design, only precision born from care. And perhaps that is the truest lesson, that to endure is not to conquer, but to care enough to rebuild even when the world forgets your work by morning. The earth, in its wisdom, has always whispered this to those who would listen. Balance, it says. Patience. Humility. But our ears are loud with engines, and our hands restless with ambition. We look for grandness, for spectacle, forgetting that the foundation of stability is quiet and small. If spiders were to vanish entirely, a world without webs, the consequences would reach farther than we can see. Insect populations would surge, carrying with them plagues of crops and diseases. Birds that depend on spiders for food would starve. Their songs fading from forests, soil fertility would weaken as the balance of nutrients collapsed. Within decades, the chain reaction of imbalance would reach us. Subtle at first, then swift and catastrophic. It is not a prophecy of doom, but of logic. The earth does not punish, it recalibrates. Remove the thread, and the web adjusts. Remove too many, and it collapses. And still within that truth lies beauty. Because the spider's legacy is not only ecological, it is moral. It shows us that quiet endurance can outlast destruction, that humility can coexist with strength, that life's most essential work is often done without recognition. We are surrounded by lessons of persistence, if only we have the grace to notice them. The spider spinning at dusk does not seek glory. It builds its web, invisible by night, fragile by morning, knowing it will be gone soon, and yet it builds again. Its faith in renewal is absolute. It does not despair the wind or the rain. It trusts the cycle. How different would humanity be if we shared that trust? If we built with the same patience, consumed with the same moderation, and adapted with the same grace? The spider's story is not a tale of dominance. It is a meditation on coexistence. It reminds us that true power lies not in ruling the web, but in maintaining it. We are, whether we acknowledge it or not, part of the same web. Our actions ripple outward, trembling along the threads that connect air to soil, predator to prey, species to species. The spider feels those tremors and adjusts. We too must learn to listen, to sense the subtle signals of imbalance, the quiet cries of forests thinning, the silence of the disappearing night. If the earth were to speak, it might say what it once whispered to the first creatures that learned to weave. Do not measure worth by noise or size. Measure it by endurance. Do not mistake stillness for weakness. The quiet ones hold the world together. In the end, the spider endures not because it is strong, but because it is balanced. It does not fight the earth. It moves with it. It does not demand permanence. It accepts impermanence and still creates. It understands, in the language of instinct, what we must learn again in the language of wisdom. That survival is not a war to win, but a song to continue. So when you see a spider in the corner of your home, remember what it represents. It is not a threat. It is a survivor, an ancient artisan, a quiet philosopher of silk and patience. It is a reflection of what the earth admires most: humility and persistence. Let it live. Let it remind you that even the smallest thread can hold the balance of the world. And if one evening you hear the soft murmur of wind against your window, imagine it is the voice of the earth, speaking through its oldest engineers, saying once more, be humble, be patient. The web is fragile, but it is enough. Weave wisely, and you will endure. In the quiet corners of the world, where morning light trembles through dew and wind hums softly through the grass, there moves a pulse too gentle to notice, a living thread that has bound the planet together since before our ancestors had names for it. This pulse is not in thunder or flame, it is in patience, it is in silk, it is in the quiet persistence of the spider, the silent architect of balance, the unspoken rhythm of life that has endured for more than 400 million years. The spider is not a symbol of fear, as so many stories have made it. It is a symbol of continuity, of the simple, unwavering will to build, even in the face of destruction. Its webs shimmer in dawn light, fragile yet eternal, respun each night after being torn by wind or rain. That quiet act, rebuilding without bitterness, weaving again what the world has broken, is the essence of life itself. It is the reason Earth still breathes. When we speak of hope, we often imagine something grand, a revelation, a revolution, a sudden blaze of renewal. But the Earth's hope rarely comes in noise or spectacle. It comes in threads. It comes in the gentle persistence of creatures that ask for nothing but the chance to continue their work. The spider's web is a whisper of that endurance, a living metaphor for resilience woven into the air. Each strand of silk stretches between fragility and strength, holding its shape through storms and stillness alike. It does not resist the wind. It moves with it. It flexes. It bends. It endures. The spider's gift to the world is not its venom or its hunting skill. It is its example. In every landscape, in every age, the spider reminds us that balance can be restored, that beauty can survive ruin, and that even the smallest act of creation is a declaration of hope. Modern science, in its growing humility, has begun to listen again to these old, quiet teachers. For centuries, humanity raced forward, convinced it could outthink nature, outbuild it, outlast it. But now, as we face the tremors of imbalance, rising heat, collapsing forests, vanishing species, we look back and realize that the lessons we need most have always been beneath our feet, suspended in air, hidden in silt. Researchers studying ecosystems have found that the smallest, most overlooked organisms often play the most essential roles in maintaining the Earth's equilibrium. Among them, the spider stands as a masterpiece of efficiency. Without them, the world's insect populations would spiral out of control, crops would fail, diseases would spread, and the quiet order of the biosphere would dissolve into noise. But because the spider weaves, because it hunts with precision and patience, balance persists. That balance, though fragile, is not weak. It is alive. It shifts, breathes, adjusts. It is a song sung in infinite variations by the flutter of moth wings, the tremble of silk, the slow exhale of soil after rain. When one voice falters, another rises. The web continues. If we could learn to see the world as the spider does, not as a hierarchy but as a network, we might begin to understand how to heal it. Every thread of life connects to another. A drop of rain feeds the soil feeds the roots shelter insects, the insect feed the spider, and the spider in turn becomes nourishment for birds, for reptiles, for the earth itself. Nothing stands alone. Nothing is expendable. Every connection matters. And so the spider's quiet presence becomes a message, not just from the past, but for the future. It reminds us that the strength of the earth does not lie in the mighty or the visible, but in the unnoticed, the interwoven, the humble. We live in a time where the great ecosystems of the world, forests, coral reefs, wetlands, depend on the survival of their smallest keepers. To protect the spider is to protect the balance that sustains everything else. Imagine a world that listens to that message. Cities built with respect for the wild threads that cross them. Fields planted not against nature, but alongside it. Technologies that echo the efficiency of the web. Strong yet flexible, productive yet gentle. Already scientists study spider silk, not just for its strength, but for what it represents. A material that achieves perfection through cooperation with nature's chemistry, not defiance of it. If our innovations could follow that path, if our progress could flow instead of tear, then perhaps we too could endure. Every day, across every continent, spiders continue their silent work. They hang their webs in the corners of homes, under bridges, between blades of grass, and across branches high in the canopy. They ask for no recognition. They need no audience. Their existence is not a plea but a practice. To live in tune with the rhythm of the world. To weave, to wait, to rebuild. Their resilience is not loud. It does not demand admiration, but it is contagious. It suggests that no matter how often the web is destroyed, it can be made anew. And that truth, carried in silk and instinct, may be the most hopeful thing the earth has ever created. In times of crisis, when we fear that too much has been lost, that species vanish too quickly, that balance is gone forever, it helps to remember the spider. There have been many endings before: the fall of forests, the cooling of worlds, the rise of predators, and the silence that followed. Through all of it, the spider endured. Its persistence is proof that life is not fragile in the way we imagine. Life is adaptable, recursive, determined to begin again. Hope, like a web, is not built once and kept forever. It must be remade daily, with care, with effort, with faith. It is torn by change and weathered by time, but it is never beyond repair. The spider's silk teaches this without words. Every act of creation is also an act of restoration. If one listens closely enough to the pulse of the world, there is something miraculous in its consistency. Even as we reshape the planet, even as the earth grows more uncertain beneath our hands, there are still webs catching the light in every corner of existence. In the ruins of cities, in the heart of deserts, in the frozen tundra and the depths of caves, spiders continue to spin, Their presence is a quiet promise that life is still at work. Science, philosophy, and wonder converge in this truth. We do not live apart from the web. We live within it. The threads that hold ecosystems together, the same threads that hold our own survival. If we pull too hard, they will break. But if we learn to move with their rhythm, to respect their tension and elasticity, we can live in balance again. To protect the spider is to protect that rhythm. It means preserving the small places, the undergrowth, the soil, the quiet margins of rivers, where webs catch the mist. It means choosing not to poison the unseen, not to flatten what we cannot see. It means remembering that stewardship is not control, but participation. The web thrives not because one creature commands it, but because every creature respects its place within it. Perhaps that is the quiet revolution we need. Not one of noise and power, but of attentiveness and grace. The spider does not rebuild the world by force. It restores it through patience. It creates not by demand, but by listening. It weaves until balance returns. And if the earth could speak to us as it once did to the first weavers, the ancient arachnids who dared to draw silk from their bodies and shape air into architecture, it might say something simple: do not forget the threads. They hold more than you know. Protect the small things, for they are the foundation of all things. The balance you seek is already here, waiting for you to honor it. Each time we spare a spider in our home, each time we let the garden grow wild enough for webs, we take part in that ancient conversation. We choose to be caretakers instead of conquerors, participants instead of spectators, and in doing so, we keep the pulse alive, the soft, steady heartbeat of the living world. There is hope woven into every strand of silk, hope that endures every storm and every morning's light. The spider, the weaver of balance, continues its eternal work, not because it must, but because that is what life does. It continues, and maybe that is what the earth has been whispering all along, through the trembling of each thread, through the gleam of each dewdrop, caught at dawn. Do not despair, life still weaves. The web still holds. Hope is quieter than fear, but far more enduring. And now, as the night deepens and the world softens into quiet, let us return to where it all began, on the edge of time itself. There was once only stone and wind, and the whisper of an ocean testing the shore. From that silence, life began to rise, small, fragile, daring. Among the first to leave the sea were the hunters with 8 legs, creeping over rock and sand, learning to breathe air and wait for their prey beneath a young and endless sky. Through the ages they grew, scorpions in the shadow of ferns, spiders weaving their first delicate threads. Forests thickened, oxygen swelled, and for a brief and shining moment the 8-legged ones ruled the land. They were the silent kings of an untamed earth, strong, patient, eternal. Then the air thinned, the forests fell, and the giants retreated. But the spiders did not vanish. They changed. They learned to live smaller, quieter, more gently. They became the keepers of balance, the soft architects of life's rhythm. Now in this modern age of light and noise, they are still here under leaves, in corners, behind the calm pulse of every night. Their webs shimmer at dawn like memory itself, threads catching sunlight, and dew in equal grace. They are reminders that power does not need to shout, and survival does not need to conquer. The spider endures not because it dominates, but because it belongs. From bare stone to blooming forest, from the rise of scorpions to the quiet patience of silk, their story has always been one of humility and persistence. They have seen the earth change and change again, and still they weave, still they listen, still they keep the balance for all who walk and fly above them. And so, as you rest tonight, imagine those ancient webs stretching through time, linking past and present like the threads of a dream. Picture them glistening in the cool morning mist, trembling with the weight of a new day. The earth hums softly beneath their rhythm, breathing in balance, breathing out peace. Let that image cradle you, the silver web between grass and sky, the quiet patience of its maker, the whisper of wind across silk. Let it remind you that even the smallest lives carry great purpose, that beauty often hides in stillness, that the world, for all its noise, is held together by gentle things. Now close your eyes. The forest grows hushed. The stars lean closer. Somewhere outside your window, a spider waits in her web, her tiny body poised in perfect calm, her threads shimmering faintly with moonlight. She is the echo of an ancient kingdom, the last lullaby of the Earth's first hunters. And if you listen carefully, you might hear her whisper, not to frighten, but to soothe. Sleep now. The world is safe in its rhythm. The balance holds. Dream of silk and stone and starlight. Dream of the patient ones who keep the world breathing. Good night, traveller of the present and listener of deep time. If this journey has soothed you, if you felt the pulse of the earth beneath each word, share it. Let others hear the story of the eight-legged kings, and may their quiet wisdom follow you into dreams. The web glistens still, somewhere in the dawn to come. Sleep gently, the earth is still weaving.